I think we've got to be really careful about things which make perfect sense, that seem logical, but actually make us make bad decisions. And in the same way, I'm kind of bothered by train apps. And that's because they always massively over-optimized by speed. And what I would like is a kind of version of Trainline which gives you the option of two other routes, one of which is the scenic route, the let's make a day of it route, okay? Which is, in other words, it maximizes enjoyment rather than minimizes time. And the other place where I think there's a real opportunity is in what you might call the canny route, the savvy route, the route that is slightly slower but is taken by people who know. Now, an app doesn't understand that because it thinks you're optimizing for time. A lot of the time, we're not.
Effectively, when we as humans process a message, we sort of process how much effort, time, and love has gone into the creation of this message, and we pay attention to the message accordingly. It's costly signalling of a kind, and this is the ultimate costly signalling. They wrote handwritten letters to everybody in the street because they had triplets, they wanted to move back to Chesterfield, isn't it? And they couldn't find a house they wanted. So they found the street they liked and chose the houses they could afford to buy on it, which weren't on the market, and they wrote handwritten letters to all the owners of those houses, explaining their circumstances and saying, would you like to sell? About 5 people, I think, 6 people got back to them. They had about 5 house tours. I think 3 people made an offer and they bought a house. Now, do you just realize how weird this is? None of those people had their house on the market. Now, on the strength of a piece of direct mail, which is a high investment, low speed, slow form of communication, okay? Handwritten direct mail is about as slow, it's about as kind of southern as you might get, okay? People who thought their house wasn't for sale decided that it was. That's a massive decision, okay? You'd think, well, there's obviously no point in trying to persuade people to sell their houses because if they wanted to sell their houses, the house would be on the market. Turns out it's not the case at all. This is a brilliant business called InkPact, which actually sort of semi-automates the process of producing handwritten letters. The success rate they have is astronomical. You know, literally response rates which are 10, 15, 20 times higher than you get in any other medium, and maybe 100 times higher than you get in digital channels.
Every great idea requires another good idea, which is, it's not enough to have a good idea, you need to know how to sell it. And one of the biggest mistakes you can make is the idea that the bigger your product idea is, the less marketing it needs. Actually, it's the opposite. If you've got a really big product idea, by definition, that will require a lot of behavioral change. And things that require a lot of behavioral change require a lot of marketing. One of the mistakes I think we're making with car electrification is very, very simple. Okay, the big obstacle is range anxiety. There are 2 components to range anxiety. There's range and there's anxiety. And quite rightly, lots of very clever scientists are spending billions of pounds a year trying to increase range by increasing the energy density of batteries. And that's a very, very good thing. What nobody seems to have noticed is that for a fraction of that money, rather than increasing range, you can reduce anxiety. Now, 2 tips. Okay, 1, there is no reason for your electric car to display both digits of the battery percentage when you're at 75%. Okay, it just weirds people out. Your petrol gauge doesn't do that. Okay, your petrol gauge is full, 3/4 full, half full, quarter full, 1/8 full, and oh shit, the lights come on. Why doesn't a battery gauge in an electric car just say 90% plus, 80% plus? I don't need to see each individual percentage of depletion. Secondly, a large part of range anxiety isn't even range anxiety, it's infrastructure anxiety. And the problem there is that petrol stations are really visible, whereas electric car chargers are hidden around the back of some industrial estate in a darkly lit exclave of the main car park. What we need is more signage, more illumination. We need legislation to basically say car charging in 5 miles, car charging in 3 miles, or you could simply go to Google and say, on Google Maps, when you're on Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, there's just a little window on the display in your car which tells you en route where your next available car charger is and how many of them are available. Hasn't increased range, it's reduced anxiety. They amount to the same thing.
I always show people this. It's really, really interesting, and it might save somebody's life. The thing on the outside you're familiar with, that's called a speedometer. Actually, the young people who don't bloody drive anymore, pathetic. Okay. But the older people among you will recognize the thing around the outside as a speedometer. We all know that. 10 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour. We're very familiar with that way of presenting speed. The thing around the inside is technically called a paceometer. And that shows the number of minutes it will take you at that velocity to go 10 miles. It's exactly the same information, right? But you notice, they're not remotely evenly distributed, these things, around the disk. This is really important because going at 30 miles an hour rather than 20 miles an hour over a 10-mile distance, that'll save you 10 minutes, right? Going at 90 miles an hour rather than 70 miles an hour will save you 2 minutes. It's not worth it, okay? When I present road speed to you in the form of a paceometer, you will very quickly realize something that you've never noticed at all yourself when driving. Maybe you have if you've got a GPS or sat-nav. You've noticed the fact that if you're driving at 70 and you think, ooh, I'm going to be 3 minutes late for that meeting, and you accelerate to 85, it actually makes fuck all difference to your arrival time. You've noticed that, right? Basically, it's a really good idea to go quite quickly, but going really fast is a total idiot's game, okay? If you're going 90 on the motorway, if you're going 85 on the motorway, okay, basically you're imposing a huge risk on yourself, a huge risk on other people, you're completely disrupting the flow of traffic, and the net time saving you'll make is so small as to be completely irrelevant. What I'm saying is that the way you present information to people affects how they behave.
All of those Charlie Bingham's dishes, I think this is what's called the IKEA effect. Okay, it says you have to put them in the oven to cook them. Now, I think that's because you enjoy the food more when you've waited for it, and the effort you've put into it by putting it in the oven basically creates a culinary experience which the microwave doesn't. The other genius thing that he did is that kind of bamboo packaging stuff, the weird wooden packaging, which fundamentally creates a kind of craft manufactured vibe rather than the factory made vibe. All of those things, we perceive them without actually being conscious of perceiving them. We don't actually go, rationally, there are chairs outside the cafe, therefore it must be open because a cafe that was closed would have locked the chairs inside. It's system one. We just automatically go, well, hey, coffee chance over there.
Most business questions, in fact, are actually really open-ended questions. They are not questions with a single right answer. They're not like high school maths questions. Let's take high speed 2. You give the brief to a load of engineers, they define the problem in terms of a couple of variables which are capable of mathematical expression and optimization. Those things are basically speed and capacity. What would have happened if you'd given that brief and the budget to Disney? Disney would have said the right question to ask is, how do you make the journey from London to Manchester by train so fucking enjoyable? They probably wouldn't have said that, they're a clean family organisation. How do you make the journey from London to Manchester by train so enjoyable people feel stupid taking the car? People feel if they drive to Manchester, they're actually missing out. That's a much more interesting question, which you could solve, actually, much more economically than by fetishizing speed and capacity. Why does that question never get asked? Because it's an open-ended question. It doesn't have a single right answer. It requires some sort of imagination and subjective judgment to decide on the right solution. You know, is it champagne on the trains? Is it ball pits on the trains? Do you actually just have really slow trains from Harry Potter going to Manchester, which means that every single fucking tourist who visits London also visits Manchester, okay? There are loads and loads of solutions to that problem. And I'm saying that's why people don't like it. They're much more comfortable in an institutional decision-making setting making a model which has a single notionally right answer, which is actually a bit crap, because you don't get blamed for it.
Social cues to which we're highly attuned emotionally, of which we're not consciously aware. I'll give you an example. If you go to a restaurant and you order wine, okay, what nobody will notice is that there's a contextual social cue that restaurants create to make sure that you do order wine. There are a variety of things. They already have wine glasses on the table. That sets an expectation. In fact, if you decide not to order wine, they take them away with a bit of a huff. Then they do something very clever. They bring you a drinks list, which isn't called a drinks list. It's called the wine list. And it has about 57 different types of wine. And then there's a really sad page at the back with all the beers and spirits. But they do something much cleverer still, which is they only give the wine list to one person. Now, that one person has to choose for the whole table, which means he's going to choose wine, because there's only one alcoholic drink, if you exclude Pimm's and tequila slammers, there's only one alcoholic drink you can order for a group, which is wine. So the man with a single wine list will always do the same thing, which is he turns to the rest of the table and says, red or white.
One of the things you can do with placebos is you can generate happiness, by the way, pretty much. I'll give you a few examples. Give customers totally trivial choices. I don't mean you choose your own course of oncology, right? I'm not suggesting we take it that far. But if you actually literally allow people to say, would you prefer a ward on the second floor or the third floor? Totally immaterial choices. People are much happier with an outcome that they've chosen than one that's been imposed on them. We had one car brand we worked with. We couldn't understand why the customer satisfaction levels seemed to be low, even though the quality of the cars was going up and up. And we discovered that it was one of Vauxhall and Ford, disproportionately large number of fleet cars. When your company gives you a car, you'll never like it as much as a car you've chosen yourself. A flower is simply a weed with an advertising budget. Nature engages in quite a lot of what seems like pointless and inefficient display. But the very pointlessness and extravagance of this sometimes is what conveys meaning to us. Broadly speaking, when you invite people to your wedding, you don't make your wedding vows door to door, and you don't send the invitation out by email. You send out an expensive or costly creative or just elaborate invitation, and you make your vows in front of everybody you know simultaneously. In attempting to make advertising an efficiency game, we've completely lost sight of a large part of what advertising works, which is that it's costly to deliver, costly to generate, and is in many cases displayed indiscriminately. It's those things that give it effectiveness. Trying to make something efficient and trying to make something effective are not the same thing. Flowers discovered this 20 million years ago.